Today, I'm happy to be joined by the TV voice, the play-by-play announcer on AT&T SportsNet Southwest of our Houston Rockets, Mr. Craig Ackerman. Thank you so much for joining, Craig. How are you doing this evening?
Hey, Manav, how are you?
Oh, I'm doing great. I just really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you. You've been somebody that I've always listened to on TV, and I want to get into play-by-play myself. That's what I want to do with my career. And so I really want to know about your journey into broadcasting as well and how you got started, because obviously I want to become an announcer someday. So how did you reach where you are right now?
Well, first of all, I appreciate it. And there are two things I really enjoy talking about: the NBA, well, three things: the NBA, the Rockets, and the business. So this should be an interesting conversation. So I was always, sports has always been a significant part of my life. Growing up, my favorite sport was baseball. It's what I played through high school and college. And originally my dreams were to become a Major League Baseball player. Obviously that didn't ultimately work out. And sort of simultaneously, I thought, well, if baseball wouldn't work out, what do I want to do? Well, I originally honestly wanted to be either a doctor or a veterinarian, until I ended up hitting some advanced chemistry and calculus. And I realized that that stuff was over my head. So becoming a physician of some kind was probably not going to happen. And so you go back to my freshman year in college. I was playing at a small school up near the Dallas-Fort Worth area, Tarleton State. I was a pitcher on the team, and our games were broadcasted on radio in schools in Stephenville, Texas. And I thought that was like the coolest thing. And again, obviously I always had in the back of my mind that I wanted to do something with sports. And then when I realized that medicine wasn't for me and I love sports and I like to talk, that's where I got the itch, my freshman year in college. I ended up leaving Tarleton State after my freshman year, transferred back down to Houston to play baseball at Houston Baptist University. And when I was at HBU, my first year there, so it would have been when I was a sophomore in college, there was another fellow student at HBU who was soon to be graduating senior, who had been working in the, remember I was playing baseball there, so who had been working in the basketball office. And he had also previously interned with the Rockets on the basketball side, on the basketball operations side. Okay. And so this was, 93, 94 time. And obviously the Rockets won back-to-back championships during that era. And the previous Rockets owner, Leslie Alexander, had bought the Rockets in 1993, right before the season started. They obviously went on to win the championship in that 93-94 season. And, at that point, I really had the itch to get into broadcasting and so forth. And this fellow student of mine, Robbie, told me that they were looking for some interns. And so he put me in contact with the Rockets, made a phone call, pled my case, came down and interviewed, and I got an internship with the Rockets in 1994. And so my first year as an intern with the Rockets was that second of the two championship seasons. Yeah. So it was pretty awesome to originally sort of experience the championship as just a fan on the outside. And even though I had a very small role working for the organization, it was special to be a part of an organization that won the championship there. And so that's kind of how I originally got my start. I ended up leaving HBU. My intentions were to transfer to a school in New Mexico to continue playing baseball, but I found out that I would have to sit out a year because it was my second transfer. And so I was like, well, I'm not going all the way out there to sit out a year. And so I was still playing some competitive summer ball, and I had a bunch of friends of mine from high school. They went to Sam Houston State. They were going to Sam Houston State, had been playing football there. And so I kind of knew them and then knew some of their extended friends because of that. And So I decided to transfer to Sam Houston State. They had an RTV department up in Huntsville, and a very good one. I could still intern with the Rockets. And then my intentions were my 5th year in college to walk on and try to continue to play baseball at Sam Houston State, but ultimately decided otherwise. And I have to admit, that was probably the best decision of my life there. I continued with my internship with the Rockets. They ended up hiring me full-time after I graduated in 1997 to work in the office. And I also produced the games on the radio. Simultaneously, I got a job doing sidelines for football at Rice and men's and women's basketball at Rice. And then 3 years later, the primary voice on radio at the University of Houston for both football and men's basketball. And then I ultimately became sort of full-time broadcast guy with the Rockets in 2003. I left U of H, started hosting pre-half and post-game shows. And then when the longtime radio announcers for the Rockets, Gene Peterson and Jim Foley, retired, I was fortunate to get promoted into doing radio play-by-play full-time in 2008. And then 6 years ago, Bill Worrell, the longtime television voice of the Rockets, decided that he wanted to cut back on his travel. And so I moved into splitting duties, home radio, road TV. And of course, after last season, Bill retired, and I just completed my first season full-time on television.
Right. I really appreciate you sharing all that. I think it's really helpful for me to like understand, how you've reached so far. Like to see that journey, I thought is really helpful. And you mentioned U of H. I'm actually going to be attending UH next year.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So yeah, I hope to, rise in my journey and continue to go up in broadcasting. I think that was some great advice. Just I really enjoyed hearing that overall. And you mentioned that you used to radio play-by-play. I think it was for home games. And tell me about the difference between doing play-by-play for radio and a TV. What transitions do you have to make between the two? What should someone keep in mind?
Well, they are extremely different. Perhaps I shouldn't admit this, but I will. Radio is far more difficult than television play-by-play in terms of the mechanics. Now, obviously, with television, there's a lot more things you have to sort of, while you're working, you have to juggle. Because on the radio, you're basically, the show is yours. You can take it in whatever direction that you want to take it in. Your primary job is to literally try to describe as much as you see, to provide the listener an opportunity to feel like that they're there. And so your primary goal is to describe the action on the floor. On TV, you got a lot of other moving parts. You've got a producer in your ear, you've got graphics, you've got other elements you've got to work in. Obviously on radio and TV, you can work with an analyst, but sometimes on radio, you're not working directly with an analyst. So it's even more you. But on TV, you basically work off of your producer's timing. And on radio, you work off your entire timing. So that's a little bit of a difference there. But what makes it more difficult is that you literally are the eyes and the ears of the person who's listening to the game. And so you have to be on top of everything. You have to describe everything. One of the early bits of pieces of advice that I received that was invaluable to me, especially when it comes to radio play-by-play, is it's impossible to get this every single time. We're talking about basketball. It's impossible to do this every single possession. But if you can do it the majority of the time, then you're good at it. If you can basically finish off your play call, right, with you saying that a basket was scored as you could hear the sound of the ball going into the rim, that means you're on top of things. That means you're really good. Again, it's impossible to have 100% hit rate on that because the game is just too fast. But that was one bit of advice that I got that I tried to definitely and try to improve upon as I went along. And so it's just, you have to describe everything: floor locations, player locations, ball movement, and there's just, there's a lot more to it. And there's a lot more verbiage. There's a lot more description. In TV, you're more or less, from a play-by-play perspective, a narrator, because everybody can see it, right? So you don't need to literally describe everything. So you're more of a narrator. You highlight the things that go well and don't go well. You really sort of lean in on your analysts quite a bit more on television because, again, people can see it. And so the role of the analyst is to tell you why and how things happen. So you lean in on more on your analysts more, but they're different. They're equally as fun. My goal obviously was to make it to television from the beginning. But I loved radio. If I had a chance to do radio again, I certainly would. But it's a little bit different, but both jobs in and of itself, it beats working for a living. So.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. I heard you on the radio for a long time as well, on the road, on road games, to see you doing all the games for Rockets broadcast. I think it was great this season to hear you. Like you said, there are a lot of differences between radio. And personally on my channel, on my YouTube channel myself, I've started doing play-by-play streams, like live streams. And it kind of reminds you of radio because my viewers can't really see the action. So right. I have to try and describe it. So, I think that's really great that, it might help me now that because radio is harder to do, it might, help me prepare more for that. So, I think it should be really helpful. And you mentioned that, the analyst is really key on a TV broadcast. And Matt Bullard used to be on the broadcast with you. And now it's Ryan Hollins, who I also recently interviewed on my channel.
Ryan's a good guy. He's a good man.
Yeah. So, how's that transition like, working with a new color commentator this year? How long did it say like for you and Ryan to really, get going chemistry wise, like on air?
What was it like to work with a new partner? It was different for sure. I loved working with Matt Bullard. I've known Matt Bullard for a very long time. And obviously they made a change in that department, and he's very happy with doing what he is now in the Rockets front office and trying to help this young team build and get back to where they need to be. Ryan's a very, very different person. Ryan's much more talkative, has a lot more energy, and I've been an energy guy myself. And so it took some time at the start, not to mention he and I basically really didn't even know each other all that well at the start of the season. We did one mock broadcast during his interview process. And then his hiring was basically finalized 1 week before the preseason. Wow. And then he had to, or a couple of weeks before the preseason, then he had to move. And so the first time we actually worked a game was in the preseason. And so he had to get to know me. I had to get to know him. Chemistry in the booth is very important. Yeah. Learning what your broadcast partner, what their strengths and weaknesses are and your strengths and weaknesses are. And then as you kind of work with someone over the course of time, you get better at allowing them to be better at what they do well. And then they allow you to do what you do well. And I thought from the start of this season to the end of the season, I thought he and I grew as much as the team ultimately grew over the season. And I really enjoyed working with him. Yeah,
I think it's great that you mentioned that. Definitely, I would think it takes some time, to get used to working with a new person. I think you guys did a great job. I think you mentioned the energy. I love that. I think a lot of people, I was looking through Twitter, etc. I think a lot of people like to see that energy because it really brings that broadcast to life. So, I really appreciate all this advice. I'm definitely going to, remember this, definitely going to apply it when I can. So
energy and enthusiasm. That would be another couple of keys of advice, pieces of advice for me. Energy and enthusiasm.
Right.
The more you have, I think ultimately the better your broadcast is.
Right. I think a lot of people these days, they want to see guys get, really excited about stuff when it does happen ultimately. And I think, you made great points about that. I also want to hear about your routine, like before the game. Now that you're doing all the Rockets games on TV, how long is your prep for like each game? What do you do once you reach Toyota Center?
Well, my prep honestly has not changed and won't change whether I do radio or TV. My prep doesn't change whether it's game 1 of the preseason or game 7 of the NBA finals. I prepare for every game the exact same way. And I think another area if you want to be successful in this profession is you have to fall in love with the process and the preparation, because you put in, I meticulously prepare for games. Once I actually walk into the arena, 99.9% of my work is already done. I like to walk into a building having all that put behind me,
Right.
so I could focus in on just, frankly, relaxing, soaking in the atmosphere, talking to players and coaches, my colleagues, things like that, having something to eat, just keeping it light and fun.
Uh-huh.
But my prep for when we play a team for the very first time, I probably prepare somewhere in the neighborhood, give or take 8 hours for a game. Usually we'll start the day before. I have to update, in many cases, redo my spotting boards. I'll email you a couple of my spotting boards that you can
Nice.
have as a template. And so it takes a lot of time the first time. So you got to, rosters change in sports
Right.
so often, especially in the NBA. There's so much
Yeah.
player movement. And so teams typically are so very different from one year to the next. So you have to update rosters, the years of experience, birth dates, general statistics, trade information, salary information, team information. So that's kind of where I originally start. And then once I kind of get the roster set, then I start plowing into each individual player to update all of their particular information. And then once I hit all that, then I go into, okay, where how did the team perform last year? How long did they last in the playoffs? Who did they beat in how many games? I get all that down. And then ultimately, once all of that general background information is done, then I start getting into the game notes. And the higher you go in broadcasting, the higher level you work. Obviously, the more information is readily available. If you're working high school games, odds are there's no game notes. There's no PR staff. Frankly, outside of the friends and families of the people who are playing, most people don't know who the players are. But the higher you go, the higher levels in college, and ultimately, once you get to professional sports, there are all kinds of people who work, and their responsibilities are to provide news and notes and information. And obviously you can turn on the TV and the internet, and there's all kinds of stuff out there. So I hit the game notes. I start going through the game notes. I update all of the current statistics for each individual player. I look to see whether or not they're posting career highs or career lows, where their ranks are in the league. And then once I get through that, my next step is I start plowing through a lot of the advanced metrics that are very present and prevalent in the modern NBA. I don't get too deep into the weeds on this, but things like offensive rating and defensive rating and rebounding percentages and steal percentage and trends and so on and so forth, because that's kind of like my mini scouting report, right? Because I want to make sure I know who the team is that the Rockets happen to be playing that night, what their tendencies are, what they do well, what they don't do well, and try to be able to convey that to the viewers. And so once I ultimately get that wrapped up, my next step is just to just sort of finalize all the stuff that we're going to do for our broadcast opens with Ryan and our producer.
Yeah.
And then, so again, it's about 8 hours the first time that we play somebody. Wow. It's probably half that, a quarter that, a third of that the second time we play someone, because I don't have to do all that original background information.
Yeah.
And I put it all together on my spotting boards and my lists. And then when I leave the house or I leave the hotel, and when I get to the arena, it's all done and I can relax and just sort of enjoy the moment.
Yeah, I think, it definitely seems like a lot of preparation, but, it has to be something that you enjoy. Otherwise, sitting there for 8 hours doing something you don't like, it's not going to work out. So
for sure.
Yeah. So I think that's great that you mentioned that. Right. I think it's really good that you mentioned that. I also want to mention, now that you mentioned like preparation, it reminded me of one of my previous interviews that I had with Ernie Johnson of TNT. When I interviewed him, he mentioned that, when prep is not fun for me, then I think that's when I'll retire. So, and he also showed me, I think, some of his notes for March Madness. Like, he showed me a whole bunch of notes and stuff like that. So, yeah, it takes a lot of work, but that's something that I want to do. So, I think I'm definitely excited for that. And you mentioned that you catch up with some of the players, before the game. So you've had any like interesting information that some of them told you, whether that was, any of the rookies like Josh Christopher, like Jalen Green, or even Alperen Şengün?
When I have conversation with players, it's just, I try to keep it just sort of light and easy. Especially if it's a game day, they're focused in on the game. I think ultimately it's just about just trying to get to know somebody on a personal level, and them, to know you. I mean, generally speaking, game days in arenas, there's not a ton of chit chats that happen because the players come in and out of at different times, and my routine is my routine. So sometimes it works, but over time, if players stick around long enough, you are able to build, sort of just general ordinary everyday sort of relationships with them. And you just kind of get to know them, who they are as a person. And, sometimes you talk basketball, sometimes you don't. I think it's very important in our position to have great relationships with your coaches. I think that's ultimately where you get a lot of insight and information from the coaches.
Right.
Obviously, there are some things that you're told or you're aware of that you can't use because you don't want to give certain secrets or inside information away. When you represent a team or a university or a school or something, obviously you're representing their best interests, and so you're not in the department of news breaking, if you will. But yeah, I think it's just generally speaking about relationships. And what I do also find to be honestly probably most helpful is just having conversations with your colleagues. They know their team better than you know their team, regardless how hard or how much you prepare. And so it's just sort of exchanging notes, what's been going on lately, who's playing well, who isn't, what kinds of certain trends are happening with certain players and teams, and you can pick up on some things that you can use that way.
Right. I think it's great that you mentioned that. It's really busy during game days, I'm sure, for them. And obviously you want the Rockets to play well, to try and keep your meetings. I guess I think probably I would guess short and right to the point, isn't it?
Yes. Especially with players. Again, on game days, I don't do a whole lot of chit chatting with players on game days, especially when they're on the floor warming up. Occasionally, they might come down in between, or if they're waiting on someone to finish up, there might be a small conversation there. But again, generally speaking, with the players, it's just to kind of let them know who you are and get to know them a little bit more, and then ultimately they get more comfortable with you. And it's just I think everybody looks at athletes as sort of robots, or these people don't actually truly exist because you just see them on your television, but they're people just like you and I. Obviously they're very good at what they do, and they excel at their particular sport, and are amongst the best in the world at doing it. And that's why they're there. But they're just regular people too. I think it's kind of neat to kind of get to know some of them when you can. Some players are more open to being more friendly than others, and that's fine. If a certain player doesn't want to be overly friendly, that's fine. If they do, great. Let's have a chat. But yeah, I mean, anytime in any place you can kind of pick up some nuggets of information to help out what you can do, you should try to take advantage of it.
Right. I think that's really helpful to have some information that I guess the audiences don't really know. I think that makes the broadcast better as well. And what is a moment, or let's just say a few moments that maybe stood out to you this season that you probably had like the most fun calling?
Oh, well, what I will say, for a 20-win team, this was a really fun season. I mean, there were certainly some low points. Obviously, the start of the year and the 15-game losing streak was a low point. But the first high point that really sticks out to me was when they went on that 7-game winning streak. Right. And Garrison Matthews kind of came out of nowhere. Obviously he had been in the league, he had been with Washington, but he just the Rockets were very down at that point, right? And they had lost 15 in a row, and they were just looking for a spark of some kind. And he kind of came out of nowhere and was playing so well. And then the fans picked up on it. And then obviously the organic swell with his new nickname of Gary Bird. I do keep TweetDeck open during games because, again, there's information that you may not pick up on your own from other writers or media that cover the team that you may or may not pick up. Generally speaking, some people you follow on Twitter, right? I mean, might have some information that you may or may not be aware of as you're working live. So I kind of keep that up. I don't stare at it, but every once in a while I will kind of glance at it. And I noticed that some people were tweeting and then ultimately tweeting at me the whole Gary Bird nickname. Yeah. And I think the best nicknames are the ones that aren't forced on people, that just sort of, again, happen organically. And I thought it was, and there was the little meme, right, with his face on Larry Bird, right? And I thought that was so cool. And I thought to myself, you know what, I need to work this in. And so I can't remember which game of the winning streak. It was a couple, 3 games, I think, into the winning streak when because he was the team's leading fourth quarter scorer during the winning streak. So it was probably somewhere around the 3rd or 4th game of the winning streak where things were like getting really crazy with him. Yeah. And I can't remember the first time I used it, but I worked it in and it kind of took off. Ultimately, the guy who originated it, I made sure I credited him. Yeah. I think a student at Texas A&M, and it just kind of took off. And so that was the first moment that was really awesome. Jalen Green's first big game against Boston at home early in the season, where he made the 8 threes, was incredible. And then, generally speaking, the second half of the season, when it was a lot of the young guys just taking huge steps forward. I mean, Jalen Green showing why he deserved to be the 2nd overall pick with his play after February the 1st. The end of the season for Kevin Porter Jr. I mean, KJ Martin, literally anything and everything he does on the floor is fun. Alperon Şengün, he's only slightly older than you are, is a stud. You know, a lot of these guys are just slightly older than you are. He had a very young team. But just watching some of the stuff that he was able to pull off over the course of the season made a 20-win team in season a lot of fun. I mean, the Rockets were good for, they didn't win a lot of games. I do think the future is bright, but even in defeat, they were good for about 5 or 6 plays a game where it just made your eyes pop out of your head. Yeah. And so it was fun. It was fun.
Yeah, I definitely do think it was fun, even though we only won 20 games, but I thought it was really times where this team was electric. And to see them, I think, come closer to some of the good teams. Obviously, maybe we weren't able to win, but to still compete, I think with teams like the Suns, I think that seemed, really exciting for me. And you mentioned Jalen Green. Like you said, it's been great to see his growth. I think the second half of the season after the All-Star break, where I personally think he gained a lot of confidence in himself to really start attacking the rim. And I think Ryan said that, Jalen was telling him that, that Jalen's realizing, okay, well, I'm faster than these guys. I can just go attack and, using the mid-range game. And I think really improving his 3-point shot. I think, for him ending the season with a career high 41, I think really made everything, come back full circle. I just want to hear maybe your thoughts on him, maybe as a person and, anything that really stood out to you in his game.
Well, I mean, look, obviously he's so young, came in the league so young. And obviously he's been a player that has been highly touted for quite some time. There are significant expectations and pressures that are placed on the shoulders of these young players, especially those that are taken as high in the draft as he was. And it is a huge jump up in level of play. Obviously, didn't play in college. He played a year in the G League.
Right.
The G League level is better than what it is in college, but it's still a massive step up in the level of play. And I think it takes certain players, especially the really young ones, it takes them some time to grasp how talented the players are at the NBA level. Most of them are all giants. They're incredible athletes. They play it doesn't really come across this way on television, but if you're in the arena, and especially if you're able to sit close to the floor, they play in a very small, tight, confined area. And so you got all these giants running around in a little amount of space, the speed of the game. There's a lot of adjustments for young players to make when they take that leap. Some players make it quicker than others. Case in point, you go back to last season, Anthony Edwards was the #1 overall pick, got off to a similarly jagged start to his rookie season that we saw from Jalen. Now, obviously, again, there were moments in the first couple of months of the year from Jalen Green that were eye-popping.
Yeah.
But the consistency wasn't there. And that's the most difficult thing for not only for Jalen Green, but for anybody at this level to sort of achieve. But it did look like the light came on. He did ultimately look like he realized that he belonged at this level. His athleticism, even for the elite athletes, was at the very tippy top of the league, and he was able to use that. I think he came in with a reputation of being a tireless worker, and he worked his rear end off all year. I think a lot of credit needs to go to the Rockets player development staff this year, John Lucas in particular with Jalen Green. But the Rockets player development staff worked tirelessly with all these young guys from day one of training camp. I mean, actually, even going back to the summer league last summer, and they all grew. And so I think that with the work he put in, combined with his confidence level growing, I think we saw again why everybody thought he had the potential to be a big thing in this league. And he definitely has a lot of people excited about the Rockets in the future, including myself.
Yeah, I think he's going to be the superstar of this team. That's what I have for him. I think a lot of people, in Houston have those kind of hopes for him, and I think he definitely showed that in the second half. And the Rockets are guaranteed to have a top 5 pick in the lottery this year. Is there any kind of player that you're pretty high on, or would you believe would be a great fit, or would you be are you open to like anyone at this point?
Well, it's a great question, because I'm asked about this a lot, and by a lot I mean, what are your thoughts on the draft in any given year? My energy and focus is so highly in on the Rockets in the NBA. I will admit I do not watch a ton of college basketball, so my opinion on prospects moving into the league, take it with a grain of salt, because there are a lot more people out there that watch a lot more college basketball and have a lot better and more of a refined opinion on this than I do, because of that. Now, what I will say is, once these young players step foot in the league, I've seen enough NBA basketball where you can tell right away whether or not, quote unquote, they belong at the NBA level. I think that I can pick out pretty quick. But in terms of who the Rockets need to take in the top 5, what I do think the Rockets need to get bigger and longer. I think the league has shifted in the last couple of years. Obviously, when the Warriors turned into the Warriors, in order to try to take them off of their perch, and they played small ball better than any team in NBA history. Everybody was most teams were trying to match up their small ball with some version of their own. Case in point, the Rockets all those years against Golden State. But the last couple of years, things have shifted a little bit, not back to where it was in the 1990s, where your prototypical back to the basket big man is dominating, but the big guys in this league, and just look at the top three candidates for the MVP. I mean, Jokic won it last year. I think he's going to win it again this year, but Jokic, Embiid, and Giannis. Giannis isn't a 5, but he's a 7-footer. Kevin Durant, 7 feet tall. The guys, big guys in this league are so skilled, so talented. I think the league has shifted back to where you need to have some level of skilled size to succeed. So the Rockets, I think they do ultimately need to get bigger. They need to improve defensively, obviously, from where they were and where they've been the last couple of years. And so where I kind of line that up, and ultimately where you also have to take into consideration, where do you think Alperen Şengün is going to fit long-term in the league? Who might best fit around him? The one player to me, and again, I haven't watched a ton of it, that seems to me that would fit all of those criteria would be Jabari Smith out of Auburn. Obviously there's some question marks about him, but there's some question marks about most of the guys who are taking the draft. But to me, on the surface, I think he might be the best guy for this team. But ultimately, I trust the Rockets front office, now led by Rafael Stone, and all their talent evaluators. The Rockets aren't in a position, in my opinion. They're not that far along in this rebuild where they can draft for need. I still think they need to take whoever they feel is the best player available when they pick. If they feel that Smith is the best guy, then they need to take him. If they feel that Chet Holmgren is the best guy, then they need to take him, and Banchero, so on and so forth. So ultimately, I think they still need to take the best player that they think is available to them whenever they pick. But again, on the surface, to me, I think it's Smith, but we'll just have to wait and see.
Hey, you're on kind of my side. I think I'm a high on Jabari Smith right now too.
Have you watched much? Have you watched him play much?
I watched March Madness as well.
Okay.
But just seeing him, I think he has a good fit. I think he has a really good, maybe he has a wing player here as well. I think his size is good. I saw his dunk against, I think it was early on in March Madness. That was crazy.
Yep.
I think he's a better defender than some of the other prospects slightly. So yeah, I think it's still early kind of to decide, but obviously Rafael Stone, I think he's done an amazing job. I think I would say a lot of people here are saying he was 4 out of 4 in the draft last year, choosing Jalen Green and Şengün and Christopher and Garuba. So, obviously we trust him as well. And last question for you here, since NBA playoffs have started, who's your NBA finals pick? Because right now I'm going with the Suns, but my surprise pick is the Nets right now. I know they lost yesterday, but that's my pick right now. Who do you have?
I think it's going to be a rematch of what it was last year, Milwaukee and Phoenix. And I've maintained this all along. Obviously Brook Lopez has not played much this year because he's been hurt, but if it appears as he's now fully healthy, if he remains healthy, I think Milwaukee remains the team to beat. Lopez is such a big body in the middle, and what he does is he basically provides a wall in front of the rim for opposing teams, and then because of his size, Giannis is allowed to be Giannis defensively. And basically, when you play Milwaukee and you have Lopez protecting the rim, and you have Giannis on one side of the floor, effectively Giannis defends an entire third of the floor all by himself because he's so big, he's so long, he's so athletic. He is truly a freak. That the Greek Freak is a perfect nickname for him. And not to mention, he's just pretty much an unstoppable downhill force on the offensive end as well. But I still think that they remain the team to beat moving forward for that reason, provided that they stay healthy. Obviously, Drew Holiday is terrific, and Chris Middleton and so forth. And I think their team is a little bit, is again, barring health, a little deeper and more versatile than they were a year ago. But what I will also say is that I think the East is a lot. I think the East actually this year from top to bottom was better than the West for the first time in probably 20 or 30 years. It's going to be tough to get out of. It's going to be tougher for the Bucks to get out of the Eastern Conference this year than I thought it was a season ago. And obviously, the Suns, best team in the league in the regular season. Chris Paul is back, had a ridiculous game in game one. He's like, 36, 37 years old. He's such a talented player. Devin Booker has become a top 10 talent in the league. Ayton protects the rim, and they have another roster that's switchable and versatile, and they can knock down threes and they can defend. So ultimately, I think it will be a rematch again in the finals this year. And I'm going to stick to my guns and say it's the Bucks' title to lose.
Okay, there's your prediction.
There we go.
Yeah.
Who do you got winning, Brooklyn or Phoenix?
I got Phoenix. Obviously, I may be a little biased because I want CP3 to get his ring, but I just think the Suns, they're just a really complete team to me right now. But anyway, Craig, I really appreciate the time. It went a bit long. Sorry about that. But
No, you don't need to apologize. This is fun. I told you I love talking about the league, the Rockets, and the business. We could have probably gone on for another 2 hours.
This is great. I really appreciate all the advice, and hopefully you can give this a retweet. I'll be posting it soon on Twitter.
For sure.
And, I hope you can give me a follow as well.
Absolutely. 100%. Thank you so much for your time. You keep going out there and doing what you do. It's people who work hard and try to succeed in this business can get a leg up on the competition, because there's a lot of competition out there in this world, but you do a terrific job. The amount of heavy hitters that you've interviewed is crazy. I'm honored to be low on that list, but I'm honored to be on the list of all these great people that you've had a chance to talk to. And best of luck to you. Like I said, I'll send you some of those spotting boards and the prep materials. That'll give you a little bit of idea of how I sort of consolidate my information. And I'll keep an eye on you and your growth and your career. And again, it was a pleasure to talk with you. And thank you so much for having me on. Yeah, of course. It was an honor. I think you gave some really great advice. And thank you so much, Craig. You have a good night. You do the same. Thank you so much for having me. Good luck. Bye.